"Order in the court," the judge said, his voice slicing through the silence like a guillotine. But the woman in the witness stand wasn't afraid. She was smiling. She looked at the man she had destroyed, the empire she was about to inherit, and she felt nothing but victory. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we have a story that sounds like a headline, but plays out like a chess match where the pieces are made of broken hearts and stolen billions. It's a tale about a woman named Serilda, who thought she had the perfect checkmate, and a man named Idris Stonevale, who sat in silence, waiting for the one question that changes everything. Get comfortable, because this isn't just a drama, it's a masterclass in revenge. Let's dive into part 1. The courtroom of District 4 did not look like a place where lives were ruined. It looked like a cathedral of light. The architect who designed it had despised the gloom of traditional justice. He had installed floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed the relentless, blinding afternoon sun to scour the room. There were no shadows to hide in here. There was no rain to weep against the glass, only the shimmering heat haze rising from the pavement outside, distorting the city skyline until it looked like a mirage. Serilda sat in the witness stand, bathed in that unforgiving light, and she glowed. She wore a suit of ivory silk, tailored so sharply it could have drawn blood. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the long, elegant line of her neck. To the jury, she looked like a victim who had risen from the ashes. To the gallery, she looked like the future. But to Idris Stonevale, the man sitting at the defendant's table with his head bowed, she looked like a beautiful, expertly crafted lie. "Ms. Serilda," said Killian Morshaw, her lawyer. Killian moved around the courtroom like a shark in shallow water, efficient, predatory, and entirely at ease. He adjusted his cufflinks, flashing a glimpse of gold. "Please tell the court about the nature of your involvement with Stonevale Dynamics." Serilda adjusted the microphone. Her movements were deliberate. She had practiced this moment in front of her vanity mirror for 2 years. "I was the chief operations officer," Serilda said, her voice a soft, melodic contrast to the harsh surroundings. "But formally, I was Idris's partner, in every sense of the word. When his wife, Vespera, withdrew into her episodes, I was the one who kept the company afloat. I was the one securing the contracts. I was the one building the legacy." In the gallery, a ripple of murmurs broke out. The press was eating it up. The narrative was perfect. The brilliant, younger woman stepping in to save the empire from the aging, negligent husband and his recluse of a wife. Idris Stonevale did not look up. He was sketching on a legal pad. To an observer, it might have looked like disinterest, or perhaps the dissociation of a broken man. He was 55, silver-haired, with the broad shoulders of a man who used to build houses with his own hands before he started building skyscrapers with his mind. Now, he looked diminished. "And what did Mr. Stonevale promise you?" Killian asked, leaning against the railing of the jury box. Serilda turned her gaze toward Idris. She let a sad, wistful smile touch her lips. "He promised me that I was the future of Stonevale Dynamics. He signed the transfer of majority operational control to me 6 months ago. He said he wanted to retire. He said he wanted to finally be free of the burden. And now?" "And now?" Serilda's voice hardened, just a fraction. "Now that the stock has tripled under my guidance, he claims I coerced him. He claims the signature is a forgery. He wants to throw me away like he threw away his wife." She paused for effect, letting the silence hang in the superheated air of the room. "But I built that company, Mr. Morshaw. I am Stonevale Dynamics." Idris stopped sketching. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper ceased abruptly. The sudden silence was louder than a shout. For the first time, he looked up. His eyes were not weary. They were clear, grey, and terrifyingly calm. He looked at Serilda not with anger, but with the curiosity of a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. Sitting high above them, Judge Leander Frostvale watched the exchange. Leander was a legend in the circuit, a man known for his distaste for theatrics. He was immune to tears, immune to charm, and famously impatient with liars. He adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching the glare of the sun. Mr. Stonevale's counsel, Judge Leander rumbled. Cross-examination. Idris's lawyer was not a high-priced shark like Killian. She was a woman named Winifred, a grandmotherly figure in a tweed blazer that had seen better decades. She looked like a librarian who had accidentally wandered into a war zone. Winifred stood up slowly, her joints popping audibly. She didn't hold a tablet or a stack of files. She held a single thin envelope. "Just a few questions, Your Honor," Winifred said, her voice scratchy. Serilda watched the old woman with veiled contempt. This was the defense? A geriatric woman and a silent, sketching husband? Serilda allowed her smile to widen slightly. She had already won. The board was on her side. The public loved her. Killian had the paperwork locked down. Winifred walked to the stand. She didn't look at Serilda. She looked out the window at the sweltering city. "It is hot today," Winifred muttered, almost to herself. Then she snapped her head toward Serilda. "You claim you built the company, Ms. Serilda?" "I claimed I saved it," Serilda corrected smoothly. "And the transfer of assets," Winifred continued, "the document transferring the Stonevale core to your name. You are certain Idris signed it willingly?" "I watched him do it." "And you know exactly what the Stonevale core entails?" "Of course," Serilda scoffed, a flash of arrogance breaking through her victim persona. "It includes the patents, the real estate holdings in Dubai and London, and the AI development wing. It is the heart of the company." Winifred nodded slowly. She placed the thin envelope on the railing. She didn't open it. "Ambition is a fuel, Miss Serilda," Winifred said softly. "But if you put it in the wrong engine, it doesn't drive you forward. It explodes." "Is there a question?" Killian barked from his seat. "No further questions for this witness at this time," Winifred said, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'd like to reserve the right to recall her later." Serilda stepped down, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her. She passed Idris's table. She leaned in, just enough so only he could hear. "You should have just retired, Idris," she whispered. "I would have let you keep the house." Idris looked at his sketch. It wasn't a building. It was a diagram of a trap door. "I don't want the house, Serilda," Idris whispered back, his voice like gravel. "I want the truth. And the truth is heavy. Be careful you don't drop it." Serilda laughed softly as she walked away, the sound bright and brittle in the sterile air. She took her seat beside Killian, who gave her a subtle thumbs up. They were winning. But neither of them noticed that Judge Leander was looking at the thin envelope Winifred had left on the table. And neither of them noticed that Vespera Stonevale, Idris's reclusive wife, had just quietly slipped into the back row of the gallery, wearing sunglasses and holding a notebook of her own. To understand why Serilda smiled, one had to understand what she had come from. She hadn't been born into the silk and sunlight of the courtroom. She had been born in the static grey periphery of the city, in a neighborhood where ambition was usually crushed by the weight of survival. 3 years ago, Serilda had been a junior analyst at a rival firm. She was smart, brilliantly, ruthlessly smart, but she was invisible. She realized early on that in the corporate world, competence was the baseline, but perception was the currency. She had met Killian Mooreshaw at a gala she wasn't supposed to be attending. She had sneaked in, wearing a dress she couldn't afford, intending to network. Killian, sensing a kindred spirit, another predator hungry for a larger hunting ground, had cornered her by the champagne tower. "You look like you want to burn this building down," Killian had said, swirling his drink. "Only the people in it," Cyrilda had replied without missing a beat. "The architecture is actually quite nice." That was the night the plan was hatched. Killian represented the investors who wanted to break Stonevale Dynamics apart. Idris Stonevale refused to sell, refused to dilute his vision. He was an old-school creator, obsessed with ethics and sustainability, refusing the quick cash grabs of military contracts and invasive data mining. "We need an inside man," Killian had told her weeks later. Or rather, an inside woman. Idris is lonely. His wife, Vespera, has practically vanished from the public eye. Rumor has it she's lost her mind. Idris is vulnerable. He needs someone to lean on. Be that person. It was a cold calculation, but Cyrilda didn't flinch. She saw it as a career trajectory. She joined Stonevale Dynamics as a strategy consultant. She worked 80-hour weeks. She organized Idris's chaotic schedule. She listened to his ramblings about humane design and ethical AI. She played the role of the eager disciple, and slowly she initiated the emotional merger. It wasn't a tawdry affair, at least not at first. It was an intellectual seduction. She made him feel seen. She validated his genius when the board called him obsolete. When he mentioned Vespera, Cyrilda would sigh sympathetically, planting seeds of doubt. "She doesn't support you, Idris. She's dragging you down. You're carrying the world on your shoulders alone." Flashbacks of those moments played through Idris's mind as he sat in the courtroom. He remembered the dinner in Paris where Cyrilda had reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Let me carry the burden," she had said. "Make me a partner. Not just in work, but in the life of the company. Transfer the control so the board can't oust you. If I hold the shares, I vote for you. Always." He had looked at her then, and he had felt a profound sense of gratitude. Or so she thought. What Cyrilda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know because her ambition acted like blinders on a horse, was the reality of the Stonevale marriage. Vespera wasn't crazy. She wasn't an invalid. Vespera Stonevale was a cryptographer. While Idris built the physical shells of their empire, Vespera wrote the code that ran through its veins. She was an introvert, yes. She despised crowds and the fake smiles of the gala circuit. So she stayed home in her high-tech greenhouse, cultivating rare orchids and writing the encryption keys that secured billions of dollars of data. Idris and Vespera had a marriage of deep, silent understanding. They didn't need to perform for the public. 6 months ago, the night Idris signed the papers for Cyrilda, he had gone home to Vespera. The memory was vivid. Vespera was pruning a black dahlia. She didn't look up when he entered. "She made her move?" Vespera asked, her voice calm. "She put the papers in front of me. The Stonevale core transfer," Idris said, pouring himself a sparkling water. "Killian Mooreshaw drew them up. It's watertight." Vespera snipped a dead leaf. "And you signed them?" "I did." Vespera finally looked at him. Her eyes were dark and sharp. "You know this will destroy your reputation, Idris. For a while. They will paint you as a senile old fool, manipulated by a young mistress." "I don't care about my reputation," Idris said, sitting heavily on a garden bench. "I care about the infection. Killian and his investors, they've been trying to poison the company for years. They want the algorithms, Vespera. They want your work to sell to the highest bidder." So we let them steal the box, Vespera said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips, without telling them the box is empty. Cyrilda thinks she's the queen, Idris said softly. It hurts, Vespera. Not the betrayal, I expected that from Killian. But the fact that she looked me in the eye and lied about caring, that stings. Vespera walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. Authenticity is rare, my love. That's why it's expensive. Cyrilda is buying a counterfeit life. We're just going to let her pay the price. Back in the courtroom, Idris stopped sketching the trap door. He turned the page. He began to sketch a flower. A black dahlia. He looked over at the gallery. Vespera was there in the back. She lowered her sunglasses just an inch, locking eyes with him. She gave a microscopic nod. It was time. The afternoon session began with the stifling heat pressing against the glass, threatening to crack it. The air conditioning hummed aggressively, battling the sun. Killian Morshaw called his next witness, the company's chief financial officer, a man named Sterling, who had clearly been promised a golden parachute to testify against Idris. Sterling was sweating. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief as he took the stand. Mr. Sterling, Killian said, pacing, in your professional opinion, was Idris Stonevale competent to run the company during the last fiscal year? He was distracted, Sterling said, glancing nervously at Idris. He missed meetings. He was obsessed with non-profitable charity projects. Ms. Cyrilda was the one making the hard calls. If she hadn't taken over operational control, the stock would have tanked. So, the transfer of ownership was necessary for the survival of the business? Absolutely. Thank you. Killian sat down, looking smug. Winifred rose again. She didn't walk to the stand this time. She stayed at the defense table, leaning on her knuckles. Mr. Sterling, Winifred said, you are the CFO. You handle the assets, the ledgers. I do. So you are familiar with the corporate structure of Stonevale Dynamics? Intimately. Good. Winifred picked up a piece of paper. Then you are aware of the Project Aegis's protocols. Sterling blinked. The sweat on his forehead seemed to double instantly. I've heard the term. It's an old R&D file. An old file? Winifred chuckled dryly. Mr. Sterling, Project Aegis isn't a file, it's a charter, specifically a charter incorporated 20 years ago when the company was founded. Cyrilda frowned. She leaned toward Killian. What is she talking about? She hissed. Distraction tactics, Killian whispered back. Don't worry. Aegis is just some old firewall software. Winifred continued. Mr. Sterling, when Mrs. Cyrilda took control of the Stonevale core assets, did you verify the IP addresses and the copyright holdings attached to that entity? The legal team handled the due diligence, Sterling stammered. The legal team led by Mr. Morshaw? Winifred pointed a bony finger at Killian. Objection. Killian stood up. Relevance? We are discussing the validity of a signature, not IP law. It goes to the state of mind of the defendant, Winifred countered calmly, and the value of what was allegedly stolen. Overruled, Judge Leander said. He was leaning forward now, his interest piqued. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. I assumed the holdings were standard, Sterling said. You assumed, Winifred repeated. She looked at the jury. In business, assumption is the mother of bankruptcy. Winifred turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense calls its first witness. We call Vespera Stonevale. The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Cyrilda's head snapped toward the back of the room. She hadn't seen Vespera in 2 years. She had told the board Vespera was catatonic in a Swiss clinic. Vespera stood up. She was wearing a simple black dress, but she wore it like armor. She walked down the aisle with a fluid, silent grace. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the jury. She walked past Cyrilda, and the air between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cyrilda felt a sudden, inexplicable shiver. She looked at Killian, but Killian wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Vespera, his brow furrowed. He looked like a man trying to remember where he had left his keys while the house was burning down. Vespera took the stand. She swore the oath in a clear, low voice. "Mrs. Stonevale," Winifred said gently, "state your role in Stonevale Dynamics." "I am the co-founder," Vespera said. "And your current title?" "I have no official title," Vespera said. "I prefer it that way." "Ms. Cyrilda claims she owns the company," Winifred said. "She has a document, signed by your husband, giving her the Stonevale core. Do you dispute this document?" "No," Vespera said. "The signature is genuine. Idris signed it." Killian let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He grinned. They had just admitted defeat. "Then why are we here?" Judge Leander asked, looking confused. "If the defendant admits he signed over the company." "He signed over the company," Vespera said, turning to look at the judge. Her eyes were dark voids. "He signed over the brand, the buildings, the desks, the bank accounts associated with the operating costs. He gave her the shell." "The shell?" the judge asked. "Stonevale Dynamics is a technology company, Your Honor," Vespera explained patiently. "The value isn't in the furniture, it's in the code, the algorithms, the intellectual property, and, Vespera said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, a mirror of the smile Cyrilda had worn, but infinitely more dangerous. Idris couldn't give her those, because he never owned them." Cyrilda stood up, forgetting herself. "That's a lie. He's the founder." "Sit down, witness," the bailiff barked. Vespera didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the judge. "Who owns the intellectual property, Mrs. Stonevale?" Judge Leander asked. The question hung in the air, the question from the title of our story. Vespera reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tattered notebook. "The company operates under a licensing agreement," Vespera said, "an agreement tied to a holding trust established 20 years ago, a trust that cannot be transferred, sold, or seized without the explicit biometric authorization of the grantor." "And who is the grantor?" Judge Leander asked. Vespera pointed a finger at the defendant's table. But she didn't point at Idris. She pointed at Winifred. The entire courtroom turned to look at the old woman in the tweed jacket. Winifred, the librarian, was currently checking her watch. "Winifred," Cyrilda gasped. "The secretary." "Winifred is not a secretary," Vespera said coldly. "Winifred is my mother, and she is the legal owner of every line of code Stonevale Dynamics has ever used." Idris Stonevale finally smiled. He closed his sketchpad. The trap door was open. The silence that followed Vespera's revelation was not the silence of peace. It was the vacuum before an implosion. "Winifred," Judge Leander repeated, looking at the grandmotherly woman in the tweed blazer with a newfound respect, and perhaps a touch of fear. "The defense counsel?" "The same," Vespera said, her voice steady. "Though she retired from practicing law 30 years ago to focus on other pursuits, she reinstated her license solely for this case." Killian Moorshaw looked as if he had swallowed a piece of broken glass. He scrambled to his feet, his shark-like grace replaced by a frantic, jerky energy. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This is a trick, a shell game. The witness is claiming that the chief operations officer of a multi-billion-dollar company was unaware that the intellectual property was held by the defense attorney." "I am claiming," Vespera countered coolly, "that the chief operations officer was too busy measuring the curtains for her new office to read the founding charter of the corporation she was trying to steal. Judge Leander slammed his gavel, the sound cracking through the tension like a gunshot. Court is in recess for 1 hour. I want the founding documents of Stonevale Dynamics and the deed to this Project Aegis trust on my desk in 10 minutes. And Mr. Morshaw, if this is a shell game, I will hold everyone in this room in contempt until the next century. As the judge swept out of the room, the gallery exploded into chaos. Reporters were shouting into phones, trying to explain how a secretary grandmother lawyer seemingly owned the most valuable AI code on the planet. Cyrilda didn't move. She sat frozen in the witness box for a long moment before Killian grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "Conference room. Now," he hissed. They didn't walk. They marched. Cyrilda felt the eyes of the room on her, not with the admiration of before, but with the predatory glee of a crowd watching a gladiator stumble. She saw Idris and Vespera sitting calmly at their table. Idris was back to sketching. Vespera was peeling an orange. They looked like a couple on a park bench, utterly removed from the disaster swirling around them. Inside the small, soundproof legal consultation room, Killian threw his briefcase onto the table. It slid across the surface and crashed into the wall. "You said you had everything!" Killian screamed. His face flushed a dangerous shade of red. "You said you had the keys to the kingdom." "I do," Cyrilda shouted back, her composure finally fracturing. "I have the transfer papers. I have the server access codes. I have the biometric entry to the server farm in Nevada. I own the physical infrastructure, Killian." "You own the hardware." Killian paced the small room, running a hand through his immaculately gelled hair, ruining it. "You own the servers. You own the cooling fans. You own the plastic and the silicon. But if Winifred holds the license to the software, and she revokes it, those servers are just very expensive paperweights." Cyrilda sank into a chair. "They can't just turn it off. The AI runs the logistics for half of Europe. If they pull the plug, they breach contracts. They'll be sued into oblivion." "They won't be sued," Killian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "We will. Because you are the CEO now, Cyrilda. You signed the acceptance of liability yesterday. Remember? You wanted to make sure Idris couldn't touch the profits?" Cyrilda felt the blood drain from her face. "Get Sterling on the phone," she commanded, her voice trembling. "Tell him to lock out external access. Tell him to override the trust protocols." Killian pulled out his phone and dialed. He put it on speaker. "Sterling," Killian barked. "What is happening?" "It's gone," Sterling's voice came through, high-pitched and panicked. Background noise suggested he was running. "I'm looking at the dashboard right now. The code, it's dissolving." "What do you mean, dissolving?" Cyrilda screamed at the phone. "I mean it's deleting itself from the local drives. It's a scorched earth protocol. The moment the ownership transfer was registered with the court, the system pinged the trust for verification. The trust, Winifred, denied the handshake. The system is wiping the proprietary algorithms. We have about 3 minutes before Stonevale Dynamics is nothing but an empty shell company holding $4 billion in debt." Killian ended the call and dropped the phone on the table. He looked at Cyrilda with pure loathing. "You didn't catch a whale, Cyrilda," he said softly. "You harpooned a naval mine." Cyrilda stood up, smoothing her silk skirt with shaking hands. Her eyes, usually so calculated, were now wild with the desperate energy of a cornered animal. "No," she said. "Ambition doesn't lose. Not like this. If they want to play dirty, we play dirty. Winifred is an old woman. Idris is soft. We just need leverage." "What leverage?" Killian sneered. "They hold the cards." "Idris loves that company," Cyrilda said, a cruel light returning to her eyes. He spent his life building it. He won't let it be destroyed just to spite me. He's bluffing. The code isn't deleting. They're hiding it. We go back in there, and we hit him where he's weak. We attack his legacy." She walked to the door, her chin held high, constructing a new reality in her mind where she was still the victor. "We tell the judge that Vespera is mentally unstable," Cyrilda said. "We claim Winifred is manipulating a senile Idris. We turn this into a competency hearing. We drag their personal lives into the light until they beg us to stop." Killian watched her, a mixture of horror and fascination on his face. He realized then that he wasn't dealing with a businesswoman. He was dealing with a narcissist who would burn the world down rather than admit she was cold. "Fine," Killian said, buttoning his jacket. "Let's go burn the world." The courtroom was fuller when they returned. Word had spread. The trial of Stonevale versus Stonevale had shifted from a corporate dispute to a spectacle of Greek tragedy proportions. Judge Leander sat at his bench, a thick stack of yellowed documents in front of him. He looked like a man who had just read a ghost story. "I have reviewed the documents provided by the defense," the judge said, his voice echoing in the hush. "They are illuminating." He looked over his glasses at Cyrilda. "Miss Cyrilda, your counsel made a motion during the recess to amend your strategy to attack the competency of the defendant and the validity of the trust based on undue influence. Is that correct?" "It is, Your Honor," Killian said, stepping forward. "We believe Idris Stonevale is being manipulated by his estranged wife and her mother. We believe the Project Aegis's trust is a fabrication designed to defraud investors." "Defraud?" Winifred spoke up from the defense table. She was no longer sitting. She was standing, leaning on a cane she hadn't needed earlier, looking every inch the matriarch. "Mr. Moorshaw, do you know who wrote the kernel for the Stonevale AI?" "Idris Stonevale did," Killian said. "Everyone knows that." "Idris Stonevale is a visionary architect," Winifred said. "He dreams of cities that breathe. He designs the bodies. But he cannot write a line of C++ to save his life." She gestured to the gallery. "I wrote it," Winifred said. A gasp went through the room. "In 1985, Winifred continued, her voice gaining strength, losing its scratchy quality. "I was a professor of mathematics at the university. I developed a heuristic learning algorithm. I called it the child. But in 1985, a woman of my age, no one wanted to fund a grandmother coding in her basement. They wanted a Steve Jobs. They wanted a Mark Zuckerberg before those names even existed." She walked slowly toward the jury box. "So I made a deal with my son-in-law. Idris was young, charismatic, brilliant in his own right. We became partners. He built the hardware, the interface, the public face. I built the mind. We agreed that to protect the child from exactly the kind of corporate greed we see today, the ownership would remain with me in a blind trust. Idris would have an exclusive, revocable license to use it." She turned to Cyrilda, her eyes hard as flint. "You didn't steal a company, my dear. You stole a rental car, and the lease is up." "This is a fairy tale," Cyrilda shouted, standing up. "Where is the proof? You're just an old woman." "The proof," Judge Leander interrupted, his voice cutting through the hysteria, "is in the patent filing from 1986, which I have right here. It is signed by Winifred Vespera Blackwood, and the biometric key required to unlock the source code is hers." The judge held up a sheet of paper. "Furthermore, the trust stipulates that if the management of Stonevale Dynamics falls into unethical hands, defined specifically as individuals prioritizing stock value over human safety, the license is automatically revoked." Cyrilda felt the walls of the sunlit cage closing in. The heat from the windows felt personal now, like a magnifying glass focused on an ant. He lied to the shareholders. Cyrilda pointed a trembling finger at Idris. If he didn't own the IP, he committed fraud every time he filed an annual report. Actually, Idris spoke for the first time in hours. He stood up, towering over the table. If you check the fine print of every annual report for the last 20 years, the fine print you were supposed to read as COO, Cyrilda, it clearly states, Stonevale Dynamics operates via exclusive license from the Aegis Trust. It was there in black and white. You were just too busy looking at the zeros in the profit column to read the words. Cyrilda looked at Killian. Killian looked at his shoes. He had missed it too. They had all missed it, because they were so arrogant, so sure that Idris was a simpleton they could roll over. "This isn't over," Cyrilda whispered, her voice venomous. "You destroyed the company to spite me. The investors will kill you. The stock is at zero." "The stock of the shell company is at zero," Vespera corrected gently. "But the trust? The trust is just fine. And since the license was revoked, we are free to grant it to a new entity. Perhaps a non-profit organization dedicated to ethical AI development." Vespera smiled. It was the smile of someone who had planted a seed 20 years ago and was finally watching it bloom. "You see, Cyrilda," Vespera said, "we didn't lose anything. We just shed a skin. You're holding the dead snake. We're already moving on. The humiliation should have ended there. A rational person would have settled, apologized, fled the country. But Cyrilda was not rational. She was a creature of pure will, and her reality was fracturing." She grabbed the microphone, ignoring the judge's order to sit down. "You think you're so noble?" Cyrilda sneered, turning her wrath on Idris. "Let's talk about the emotional merger, Idris. Let's talk about the nights in the office. Let's talk about how you leaned on me. You loved me. You told me I was the only one who understood you." She was playing her last card. Public scandal. If she couldn't have the money, she would destroy the man. "You're a cheater, Idris Stonevale," Cyrilda shouted, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You used me to feel young again, and now you're hiding behind your wife's skirt." The courtroom went dead silent. The press leaned in, cameras zooming. This was the dirt they came for. Idris walked slowly from behind the defense table. He walked until he was standing just a few feet from the witness box. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly sad. "I didn't cheat on my wife, Cyrilda," Idris said quietly. "And I didn't love you." "Liar!" Cyrilda hissed, tears of rage pricking her eyes. "We had a connection. We had a mirror," Idris said. "You mirrored what you thought I wanted. When I was tired, you were energy. When I was doubtful, you were confident. You made yourself into the perfect reflection of my needs." "But a reflection isn't a person, Cyrilda. It's just light bouncing off a surface." He took a step closer. "I knew what you were doing 3 months in," Idris revealed. "Vespera knew too. We talked about it over tea. We watched you isolate me from the board. We watched you gaslight the staff. We watched you forge my signature on minor memos to test if you could get away with it." Cyrilda's mouth fell open. You knew?" "We let you do it," Idris said, "because we needed to know who else was loyal to the money instead of the mission. You were the perfect bait, Cyrilda. You drew out Sterling. You drew out the corrupt board members. You drew out Killian. You gathered all the rot in the company into one basket." Idris sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "I let you think you seduced me because it was the only way to get you to overreach, to get you to sign that liability agreement, to get you to take the Stonevale core, the empty box, so that when the trap snapped shut, the blast would be contained to you and your co-conspirators. You used me? Cyrilda whispered, the realization shattering her victim narrative. You're the monster. You manipulated me. I allowed you to be yourself, Idris corrected. I gave you a rope, Cyrilda. You were the one who tied the noose. Idris turned his back on her. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, the defense moves for a dismissal of all claims. And Idris paused, glancing at Killian, who was currently trying to sneak his phone into his pocket. We would like to submit the audio recordings of the consultation room from the recess, the ones where Miss Cyrilda and Mr. Moorshaw discuss burning the world and conspiring to commit perjury regarding my mental health. Killian froze. The consultation room? Killian squeaked. Stonevale Dynamics specializes in security, Idris said dryly. And you were using a company room, in a company building, on a secure line. Judge Leander looked at Killian. He looked at Cyrilda. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Moorshaw, the judge said, his voice dangerously low. Miss Cyrilda, I suggest you both sit down. The bailiff will secure the doors. No one is leaving this room until the district attorney arrives. Cyrilda slumped back into the chair. The sun beat down through the glass, no longer a spotlight of glory, but a relentless, blinding interrogation lamp. She looked at the empty air where her empire used to be. Winifred packed her knitting into her bag. Vespera took Idris's hand. They didn't smile. There was no joy in catching a predator, only the relief that the hunt was over. But the story wasn't quite finished, because while Cyrilda had lost the company, she still had one thing left, her pride. And a person with nothing but pride and a corner to back into is the most dangerous thing in the world. As the bailiffs moved toward the table, Cyrilda reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. You think you wiped everything? Cyrilda said, a manic grin spreading across her face. Sterling might be an idiot, but I'm not. I made a copy of the source code 3 months ago. Before the transfer, before the scorched earth. She held the drive up to the light. If I go down, she threatened, this goes to the dark web. Every terrorist, every dictator, every hacker on Earth gets the Stonevale AI. How's that for ethical design? The courtroom gasped again. Idris stiffened. Vespera's grip on his hand tightened. Winifred just laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound that filled the tense silence. Oh, child, Winifred said, shaking her head. You really don't understand how cryptography works, do you? The laughter of an old woman is rarely a terrifying sound, but in the sterile, high-tension atmosphere of courtroom 4, Winifred's chuckle sounded like the rattle of dry bones. Cyrilda stood frozen, the silver flash drive held aloft like a holy relic or a grenade. Her arm trembled, not from fear, but from the vibrating intensity of her adrenaline. She had expected horror. She had expected Idris to beg. She had expected Vespera to finally crack. Instead, she got the dry amusement of a retired academic. You think this is funny? Cyrilda screamed, her voice fraying at the edges. This drive contains the source code for the Stonevale logistics engine. It controls air traffic for 3 countries. It manages the power grids of 2 major capitals. If I upload this to the open web, the chaos will be biblical. I will burn your legacy to the ground. Ms. Cyrilda, Judge Leander roared, banging his gavel so hard a piece of varnished wood chipped off. You are threatening domestic terrorism in a court of law. Bailiffs, restrain her. One moment, Your Honor, Winifred interrupted, raising a hand. Her voice was calm, authoritative, cutting through the panic like a laser. Before we tackle the young woman, perhaps we should address her weapon. Winifred turned to Cyrilda, leaning heavily on her cane. You copied that drive 3 months ago, you said? Yes, Cyrilda hissed, backing away from the approaching bailiffs. Directly from the main frame, I used Idris's credentials while he was sleeping. I know you did, Winifred said softly. The system logged the download at 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. We got the alert immediately. Cyrilda blinked. You knew? My dear, Winifred sighed. Did you really think that the most sophisticated AI on the planet didn't have an immune system? When you accessed the core with Idris's credentials at an irregular hour, the system didn't give you the source code. It gave you a honeypot. A what? A decoy, Vespera spoke up, her voice cool and fluid. We call it the Narcissus Protocol. The file you downloaded looks like the source code. It has the same file size, the same directory structure, the same complex headers. But it isn't the AI. It's a mirror. You're lying, Cyrilda stepped back, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. You're trying to trick me into handing it over. If you attempt to upload that drive, Winifred continued, her tone dropping to a grave warning, or even if you plug it into a network-enabled device, the protocol activates. It doesn't release data. It absorbs it. It is designed to trace the user's location, encrypt their hardware, and broadcast their GPS coordinates to every cybercrime division within a 5,000-mile radius. It's a beacon, Cyrilda. It's not a bomb for us. It's a tag for you. Cyrilda looked at the small silver stick in her hand. Suddenly, it didn't feel like power. It felt like a radioactive isotope. She's bluffing, Killian yelled from the defense table, though he was currently cowering behind his briefcase. Upload it, Cyrilda. Do it. Mr. Moorshaw, if you utter one more word of incitement, I will have you gagged, Judge Leander threatened. Cyrilda looked at Killian, then at Idris. Idris was watching her with that same unbearable pity. Don't do it, Cyrilda, Idris said quietly. Not because of the company, but because once you plug that in, there is no coming back. Right now, you're a corporate thief. Don't become a terrorist. I am not a thief, Cyrilda cried, tears finally spilling over, hot and angry. I earned this. I sat through your boring dinners. I listened to your dreams. I managed your life. I deserve compensation. You deserve a severance package, Vespera said sharply. Not an empire. Cyrilda's hand shook violently. The bailiffs were 10 feet away, 5 feet. She made a choice. It wasn't a choice of logic, but of pure, spiteful defiance. She saw a laptop sitting on the clerk's desk, open, running, connected to the court's secure Wi-Fi. With a shriek of rage, Cyrilda lunged. She moved faster than the bailiffs expected. She slammed the flash drive into the USB port of the clerk's laptop. "Burn!" she screamed. The screen of the laptop flickered. The room held its breath. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a single window popped up on the large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls, mirroring the clerk's screen. It wasn't code. It wasn't a loading bar for a global virus. It was a video file. On the screen, grainy black and white footage began to play. It showed Cyrilda, 3 months ago, sitting at Idris's desk in the middle of the night. She was drinking Idris's scotch. She was talking on the phone. "He's such a pathetic old man," the Cyrilda on the screen said, laughing. "He actually thinks I care about his sustainable future. I'm going to strip this company for parts, Killian. We'll sell the patents to the Chinese consortium and retire to the Maldives. Vespera won't do a thing. She's a ghost." The audio was crisp. The image was undeniable. Cyrilda stared at the screen, her face draining of all color. "The Narcissus Protocol," Winifred said, her voice echoing in the silence. It reflects the user's true nature. It doesn't hold the code, Cyrilda. It holds the surveillance footage of the theft. You just played your own confession to the court. Cyrilda's knees gave way. She didn't faint. She simply collapsed, the strength leaving her legs as the weight of her absolute failure crushed her. She sat on the floor of the courtroom, surrounded by the golden light she had loved so much, looking small, broken, and utterly defeated. "Get her out of my sight," Judge Leander said, his voice weary, "and take Mr. Moorshaw with her." As the bailiffs hauled a sobbing Cyrilda and a protesting Killian away, Idris didn't look triumphant. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking every day of his 55 years. "It's over," Vespera whispered, touching his arm. "No," Idris said softly. "The trial is over. The cleanup is just beginning." The weeks following the trial were a blur of media frenzy. The story of the mistress who stole a mirror became a global sensation. Memes of Cyrilda trying to upload her own confession trended on every platform. The Narcissus Protocol became a slang term for instant karma. But inside the Stonevale residence, the mood was somber. Idris sat in his study, the room cluttered with blueprints and sketches. But he wasn't drawing. He was staring out the window at the rain. The heatwave had finally broken, and the sky was weeping grey tears against the glass. Vespera entered with 2 cups of tea. She placed one on the coaster, a piece of slate Idris had cut himself years ago. "You haven't touched your drafting table in a week," Vespera observed. "I feel—" Idris searched for the word. "Contaminated." "You were the victim, Idris." "Was I?" Idris turned to look at her. "I used her, Vespera, just like she used me. I let her get close. I let her think I loved her. I played with a human being's emotions to catch a thief. How is that different from what she did?" Vespera sat in the leather armchair opposite him. She took a sip of tea, the steam curling around her face. "The difference," Vespera said, "is intent. Cyrilda wanted to destroy. You wanted to protect. You didn't force her to be greedy, Idris. You didn't force her to lie. You just stopped correcting her mistakes." "It still feels cold," Idris murmured. "I look at the company now, the new foundation we're building, and I see her face. I see the ambition I exploited. Ambition is neutral," Vespera said. "It's vector and magnitude. Cyrilda had high magnitude, but her vector was selfish. We are redirecting the energy." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a letter. It was on standard prison stationery. "This arrived today," Vespera said, "from the detention center." Idris stared at it. "From her? Read it." Idris took the envelope. His hands shook slightly. He opened it. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, so different from Cyrilda's usual elegant, practiced script. "Idris, my lawyer says I should hate you. He says we can appeal. He says entrapment. But I watched the video, the one on the drive. I watched myself calling you pathetic. And I realized something. You weren't the one acting. I was. I spent so long pretending to be the person you wanted, I forgot who I was. I don't even know what I like anymore. I don't know what I want, other than more. You said I was a reflection. You were right. And when you took the mirror away, I vanished. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that the trap door worked. I fell through, and it's dark down here." Idris lowered the letter. He felt a lump in his throat. "She's right," Idris said hoarsely. "She vanished." "She can reappear," Vespera said firmly. "But she has to build herself from scratch this time. No shortcuts. No stealing someone else's life." Vespera stood up and walked to the window. She placed her hand against the glass, matching her palm to the rain outside. "We have work to do, Idris. The Aegis Foundation launches next week. We are giving the code to the world. Open source. Regulated by the community. Not a board of directors. It's what we always wanted. It means we lose the billions, Idris said. We never needed billions. Vespera smiled, turning back to him. We needed enough for the greenhouse, enough for the drafting table, and enough peace to enjoy them. Idris looked at his wife, really looked at her, for the first time in years without the shadow of the company between them. He saw the grey in her hair, the lines around her eyes, and the fierce, uncompromising intelligence that had saved him. "You're right," Idris said. He picked up his pen. "I think I want to design a library. Something open, lots of light, but no glass walls this time. Stone. Something solid. Stone is good," Vespera agreed. "Stone lasts." The correctional facility was stark, utilitarian, and grey, a sharp contrast to the lush, vibrant world Cyrilda used to inhabit. She wore a jumpsuit of dull orange, a colour that washed out her complexion. Her hair was cut short, practical, no longer the flowing mane that had been her trademark. She sat in the visitors' room, her hands folded on the metal table. Across from her sat Winifred. The older woman looked exactly the same as she had in court. Tweed blazer, sensible shoes, eyes that missed nothing. She didn't look malicious. She looked like a teacher checking up on a difficult student. "Why did you come?" Cyrilda asked, her voice raspier than before. She hadn't spoken much in the last year. "Curiosity," Winifred said, "and because Idris couldn't bring himself to. He's too soft." "He's not soft," Cyrilda said, looking down at her hands. "He's good. I see the difference now." "You pleaded guilty," Winifred noted. "You could have dragged it out for years. Killian is still fighting his charges, blaming everyone from his mother to the phase of the moon. But you took the 5 years." "I was tired of lying," Cyrilda said. She looked up, and for the first time her eyes were clear. There was no calculation in them. "I spent my whole life calculating angles, trying to be the smartest person in the room. It was exhausting, Winifred. Being in here, having nothing. It's the first time I've been able to just breathe." Winifred nodded slowly. She reached into her bag. She wasn't allowed to bring much, but she slid a paperback book across the table. It was a biography of an architect. Not Idris. Someone from the 1920s who had built cathedrals. "You were a good operations officer," Winifred said. "Before the greed took over. You organized chaos. You had a mind for structure." "I used it to build a cage," Cyrilda said bitterly. "Cages can be dismantled," Winifred said. "You have 4 years left. You can spend them plotting revenge, or you can spend them studying." "Studying for what? Who will hire me? I'm the woman who tried to steal the sun." "The Aegis Foundation needs logistics managers for their outreach programs," Winifred said casually. "They work with ex-convicts. It's a rehabilitation program. Hard work, low pay, zero glamour. But the work is real." Cyrilda stared at the book. "You'd hire me, after everything." "Not me," Winifred said, standing up. "I'm fully retired now. I'm going to spend the rest of my days knitting and annoying my daughter. But Idris, he believes in redemption. He believes that if you build a foundation strong enough, you can support any weight." Winifred turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "The mistress died in that courtroom, Cyrilda. The woman sitting here. She's a blank slate. Write something true on it." Winifred walked out, the heavy metal door clanging shut. Cyrilda sat alone in the silence. She picked up the book. She felt the texture of the paper, the weight of the words. She opened to the first page. Outside the prison walls, the world was moving on. Stonevale Dynamics was gone, replaced by the Aegis Initiative. The stock market had recovered, finding new idols to worship. Killian Moorshaw was a footnote in a legal textbook, but in a small garden behind a modest house on the edge of the city, Idris and Vespera were planting orchids. "Did she take the book?" Idris asked, wiping dirt from his hands. "She did," Winifred said, sitting on a garden bench with a glass of lemonade. "Do you think she'll make it?" Vespera asked, pruning a black dahlia. "I don't know," Winifred admitted. "The variable is free will. I can write the code, Vespera. I can build the logic, but I can't program the human heart." Idris stood up and looked at the sky. It was blue, clear, and vast. "She has to build her own house now," Idris said. "We just gave her the bricks." He took Vespera's hand. They stood together, 3 generations of complexity, intelligence, and survival, watching the sun dip below the horizon. They didn't need to say anything else. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of truth. And for the first time in a long time, no one was acting. And that, my friends, is how the house of cards didn't just fall. It was blown away by the wind of truth. Cyrilda learned the hard way that you can steal a title, you can steal an office, but you cannot steal the soul of a creation. Idris and Vespera showed us that true power doesn't scream. It whispers. It waits. And most importantly, it protects what matters. This story reminds us that in a world obsessed with fake it till you make it, there are some things like integrity, love, and genius that simply cannot be faked. When the judge asks who owns the company of your life, make sure the answer is you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into corporate betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out in the end. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'll see you in the next video. Stay authentic.